And welcome back to the show. Sane Energy Project is a not-for-profit organization that's opposing the development, transport, and export of fracked gas. Sane Energy's mission is to build a potent grassroots movement pushing for a rapid and just transition to 100% publicly owned renewable and sustainable energy in New York. Sharing now a little bit more about the work is the Just Transition organizer at Sane Energy, Anna Tsomo. And Anna, good to have you.
Good morning, Daren. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And so talk about an issue that's very important to New Yorkers from your perspective. Share with us a little bit about the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sane Energy Project is a tiny but mighty justice organization that works, as you said, to fight fracked gas infrastructure and instead advocate for the development and utilization of renewable energy solutions. It was formed in 2011, back when I was just in school and not working in the world, by some of my amazing colleagues. And it formed to fight against the Spectra pipeline. And that fight we actually lost. And it goes under the Whitney Museum and into the West Village. But since then, we've also won a lot of fights, such as Port Ambrose, which was a liquefied natural gas terminal that was proposed off the coast of Long Island. And that got stopped through community outreach and organizing. And then also the Williams pipeline was proposed off the coast of the Rockaways. And that actually got stopped 3 times by activists and organizers.
No, I'm sorry. I thought you took a break for a second, but I'll just ask a question and you help me out. When you talk about the work actually being stopped by activists and organizers, what do you contribute to being the key factor in getting this work stopped?
Well, I think it really takes a diversity of tactics, and that's one of the amazing things about community organizing, is that it's very fluid and it changes based on what the needs are. So we do everything from community outreach, which means like knocking on people's doors and handing out flyers, to having meetings with elected officials to try to get policies put in place that would protect the environment. So it really is a grassroots organizing approach, which means getting education as much as we can in the communities that are affected, and then going all the way up the chains of power from there. So we've done direct action and protest. We've had people lock down to construction sites to try to shut down construction of fossil fuel infrastructure. And then we've also had like people send in tons of public comments, right? We had over 40,000 public comments against the North Brooklyn pipeline, which really goes to show like how much opposition there is. And the piece I was saying earlier about the Williams pipeline, the wonderful thing is that we've seen this kind of organizing work before. So the Williams pipeline, people were really concerned that it would poison the waters off the coast of the Rockaways, right? So there was a really strong community grassroots outreach push for that. People started organizing, and we beat the Williams pipeline, and it tried to come back. It was like a zombie pipeline. It tried to come back 2 other times through different bureaucratic, like kind of technicalities, but we beat it 3 times. And because we beat that pipeline, there's now an offshore wind farm being proposed for off the coast of the Rockaways instead, which is much healthier for our planet.
Yeah. And when you talk about public awareness, I know that's a great responsibility of your organization, really creating that public awareness. What do you find when it comes to dealing with this issue of fracking and the public? Is the general public generally aware of what's going on, or does it really take a great sounding of the alarm?
I think one interesting thing about fracking in New York State specifically is that fracking itself actually got banned back in 2015. And that was because of, again, grassroots organizing and community organizing. And so a lot of folks don't realize that just because fracking is banned in New York State, these companies are still trying to bring fracked gas in to our communities, right? So the danger is still there. And so a lot of folks may know that fracking is banned, but not realize that some of the dangers of fracked gas are still threatening people in New York City. So it's a little bit of an educating curve on that information. Like, well, Fracking itself is still happening. A lot of the fracking occurs in Pennsylvania, so we need to be in solidarity with the fracked communities who are being poisoned and harmed in Pennsylvania. The director of Sane Energy Project, Kim Fracek, is an amazing organizer and comes from Pennsylvania, where her mother actually can't drink her water, her tap water, because of fracking. So it really does impact communities, and that's the kind of thing that we need to educate people on. And some folks may not really care about fracking that much, may not think that it's an important issue in terms of the climate, but it really is. And we've recently had the IPCC report come out just in advance of this big climate conference coming up, COP26. And that report really highlighted how crucial it is to get off of fracked gas. Methane is the primary component of fracked gas, and it was really highlighted how methane is one of the worst greenhouse gases in terms of climate change. It's even worse than CO2. So people, I think, vaguely know that fracking is bad. Before I got involved in this work, I vaguely associated that fracking is bad, but it took me some time to really learn how bad it is, and the fact that even if fracking is not happening in your community, the use of fracked gas is still really harmful, just on a local level and then on a global climate level as well. Because that's the thing about climate change, is it's going to affect every single person alive. And for those who have more privilege and more power, it's really important that we try to advocate for communities that are being exploited, use our privilege and power to try to stop the effects of climate change for those that will be disproportionately affected.
Yeah. Right now, I know that you're really sounding the alarm again, talking about National Grid in Brooklyn. Bring our viewers up to speed with you taking on National Grid and what's going on in Brooklyn.
Yeah, so the North Brooklyn pipeline is being built by National Grid in Brooklyn. It starts in Brownsville, which is where my mom lives, and there's a really amazing community organization called Brownsville Green Justice that's fighting it locally there. And then it goes up through Bed-Stuy, Williamsburg, Bushwick, and into Greenpoint. And there's a National Grid facility in Greenpoint, which they're trying to bring this fracked gas to through all these communities. And as I said, fracked gas proposes a lot of dangers. So methane can cause respiratory illness. And these communities, it's largely communities of color and working class communities. And we know that disproportionately COVID rates are higher in marginalized communities, right? These are environmental justice communities that have been fighting against environmental racism and disproportionate health effects for a really long time. So that's why we're fighting so hard to advocate for renewables instead and for shutting down the North Brooklyn pipeline, because communities deserve investment into healing, better healthcare, more green spaces, and not more fossil fuel infrastructure, And the kicker is that National Grid has also recently gotten permission from New York State government, the Public Service Commission, to raise our gas bills. So people all over New York City are going to actually be paying to poison the folks in Brooklyn with this pipeline. And it is over 150,000 folks that live right next to the pipeline. Brooklyn's really big, so it doesn't make sense for us to allow a company to not only make us pay for it, but just have this toxic infrastructure in so many backyards.
Yeah. What's the response of elected officials when you have this conversation? Obviously, some of them, I'm sure, are getting new revelation and information when it comes to this.
Absolutely. So we recently actually had an exciting press conference where Senator Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, actually came out against this pipeline. And so even from the highest levels of government, like the Senate Majority Leader, all the way down to the former city council members, we had unanimous support in the city council. A lot of community members, or rather elected officials in the local communities that are impacted by this pipeline, have come out really strongly against it, come out to our rallies, given talks, and so it's clear that because elected officials are listening to the constituents in these areas, the constituents don't want it. That means the elected officials are going to oppose it as well.
And so talk to us about what we can do right now. I mean, how does the public become more involved, more engaged, and really raising their voice in something that is so impactful to so many people?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. One thing that we're asking everyone in New York City who pays a national grid bill to do is join our gas bill strike. So we are actually refusing to pay for the North Brooklyn pipeline and other fracked gas projects that National Grid wants us to pay for by raising our bills. And so you can find more information about that at nobkpipeline.org/strike. And what we're doing basically is we're saying you should withhold $66 from your National Grid gas bill, because that's about how much each New Yorker who pays for National Grid will pay for this pipeline over time. So we're not asking you to not pay your whole gas bill. That has a lot more risks involved for strikers, but just keep that balance owed of $66 from month to month, right? Because we're saying, you know what, you can't have our money to poison our communities. You can't have our community to poison our planet. And so that's why we're striking. And if you want to really throw down and get involved, we do outreach all the time. We do flyering, we do phone banking. So if you want to volunteer with us, we can get you on board, figure out what's the best way for you to plug in and protect Brooklyn communities and protect the climate. But we do ask, even for folks I know that you all are based in the Bronx, if you pay a National Grid gas bill and you're in New York City, your bill is already started to go up to pay for this pipeline. So we really want to strike and get people to prove we won't pay for this pipeline. And strikes have worked in the past. There was a Con Ed strike, I believe is back in the 70s, and there was like 1 million strikers, or a really strong number, and Con Ed actually had to pay people back for the damage they caused. So people power does work. And so that's why we're pushing this so hard to really get people to join our strike and join our outreach and movement to fight against this pipeline.
And what you talk about when it comes to the pipeline, I know that you say that the pipeline is also racist. I want you to make it very clear to people how you view the pipeline as being racist.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this map that I believe there's an amazing coalition called Frack Out of Brooklyn. And I believe that them or Mi Casa Resiste, another great coalition, made a map that shows the route of the pipeline and it overlays it with the communities of color. And it's almost identical, really. So this company, National Grid, they picked a route of this pipeline that they thought would be least resistance, right? They picked on communities that are already facing so much oppression that they thought these folks will not have enough energy, enough time, enough resources to fight back, right? And that's how it's environmental racism, because it's going through communities of color that have been facing legacies of environmental racism for a really long time. And so that's why it's so important that we do local community outreach, not only just like organizations like Sane Energy Project that have a lot of background into fracking and been fighting fracking for a long time. We don't want to advocate for communities. We want to empower communities to advocate for themselves. People who have been living in Bushwick and Brownsville and Bed-Stuy and Greenpoint for generations. These are the folks that we want to advocate for themselves, empower themselves to fight back, right? But it really is just an act of environmental racism by National Grid. And it's something that we see over and over again, is that toxic infrastructure projects are placed in communities that are communities of color and working class communities. And you know, it really goes back to colonization, the way that extraction happens in the global south and then consumption happens in the global north. You know, it's patterns that we've seen for years and years. And so we're trying to fight back against environmental racism and colonization by shutting down this pipeline.
Yeah, and I know our viewers will get an opportunity to see exactly where these communities are that are going to be actually impacted. But I think you touch upon something that's really profound and not really profound for us because we talk about this all the time, but profound in the minds of so many other people. Because when we talk about fracking and we talk about all this unjust environmental racism, it always does occur in those communities of color where we talk about pockets of people who are really dedicated to trying to live their best life, but seem to find themselves having to deal with the worst challenges because everything seems to be pushed upon them. Agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And just as an example, on either end of this pipeline, so Brownsville, which is where it starts, is 99% population of color, and it also has the lowest life expectancy in all of New York City, right? this is an example of how environmental racism really affects people's health and lives. And then on the other end of the pipeline, Greenpoint, specifically on Newtown Creek, which is right next to that National Grid facility, there was the largest North American oil spill there back in, I believe, the 70s. And so people are still dealing with the toxins of that. And it's a super fun site. And so that makes people sick. And it's really difficult because corporations have so much power. They're strategic in making it really difficult to make the direct connection between their pollution and the fact that people are getting sick in those areas. But people that live there and people that organize there understand that these multi-billion-dollar international companies with so much power and so much influence are really directly making people sick and getting away with it, you know? And again, that just points to the power and the necessity of organizing against these projects.
Yeah, and I know that you've got some things happening in the near future. So before we wrap up, please get an opportunity to share with our viewers how they can take part and know a little bit about what's happening in the near future.
Absolutely. So you can follow our coalition on social media. That's at No NBK Pipeline on Twitter and Instagram. For Facebook, it's No North Brooklyn Pipeline Coalition. You can go to our website at www.nobkpipeline.org. Please join our gas bill strike. You can send us a message if you want to get more involved with organizing. We want to have a protest soon because National Grid, this company, even though they are directly poisoning communities of color, somehow they have become a primary sponsor of this upcoming climate conference. And talk about hypocrisy, right? They're claiming to be a climate leader, talking about, oh, all the great work they're going to do for climate solutions, while still building a fracked gas pipeline that emits methane in communities of color in Brooklyn. So that just goes to show how evil and how tricky these corporations are. So if you want to come out to a protest, be on the lookout. We'll have information out soon about that. But we continually do outreach if people want to organize. We always have space for more folks. And I also wanted to mention, excuse me, that there is a pipeline that comes from Westchester and goes through the Bronx as well. And we do not organize around that as much because we are so much based in Brooklyn. But if you want more information around this, there's not much organizing going on right now about this, but we know that folks in the Bronx want to protect their communities, protect their families. So please reach out to us at Sane Energy Project, and we can give you information, we can give you resources if you want to organize against that as well.
Most definitely. We appreciate the information. That's why we bring it to the show, right? To talk about the issues and to really make our public aware. That's part of what we want to do. We want to create public awareness. And so, Anna, you've done that for us today. And thank you so much for being with us, Anna Tsomo.
Thank you so much, Daren. Have a great day.
All righty. Well, listen, I want you to stay with us because we continue on the social justice forums, continuing the topic of conversation, promoting civic engagement, but most of all, bringing awareness. Talk to you in a few.